In Minecraft, when you go millions of blocks out from spawn, something breaks. In older versions, when you go 12.5 million blocks out from 00, the purling noise generators hit the 32-bit integer limit. This causes the game to break down and generate things that would usually be impossible for normal world generation. Cliffs that twist back on themselves and chunks of stone just floating with nothing underneath them. Getting to these coordinates would take an extremely long time. Walking non-stop without ever sleeping would still take over a month. But one man has dedicated over 14 years to reaching them. This is the story of how one man managed to reach the Farlands. If you enjoy this type of content, feel free to subscribe, as I put a lot of effort into these videos and it helps me out a bunch. No pressure. Earlier, I briefly explained that the purling noise generators hitting the 32-bit integer limit causes the Farlands, but this is a very brief explanation. Like many things in Minecraft, the world generation on older versions starts to break down at the 32-bit integer limit. Although the 32-bit integer limit is 2.147 billion, world generation breaks far before those coordinates. You see, world generation in Minecraft uses a 3D purling noise generator to create terrain such as hills and valleys. To determine the shape of any given block, the game took your block coordinate and multiplied it by 171.103 to sample the noise map. This caused the Farlands to generate at about 12.5 million blocks, when your coordinates times by 171.103 reached the 32-bit integer limit, being about 2.147 billion. Once you cross that line, the noise generator doesn't just get a bit weird. It starts spitting out numbers so far outside its normal range that the terrain height calculations basically become random. Massive jagged spikes tear straight up out of the ground, while entire chunks of land just hang in the air with nothing supporting them, and caves collapse into whatever's left underneath. In some older versions, it wasn't even a landscape you could keep walking through. It was closer to a wall, a complete dead end that nobody was ever supposed to reach in the first place. Bedrock Edition has its own version of this phenomenon called the stripe lands, caused by a similar kind of math breaking down, though it looks completely different. More like the world tearing into flat vertical stripes instead of the jagged cliffs Java players know. But the original Farlands, the one everyone actually means when they talk about this glitch, only exists in Java Edition, and only in versions before Mojang patched it out. Back when it was first being discovered, finding proof of the Farlands became something of a badge of honor among early Minecraft players. Screenshots of the glitch got passed around forums long before most people even had a way to actually reach it themselves. After thousands of people said reaching the Farlands would be impossible, with Notch himself even writing a blog post acknowledging that the glitch existed and stating it wasn't feasibly possible to reach. Notch actually wrote that when he was building the infinite world system, he already knew the game would start to bug out at extreme distances. He just never expected anyone to actually go check for themselves. Kurt J. Mack started a challenge and series called Farlands or Bust, committing to walk the entire 12.5 million blocks on foot in survival, all on live. Kurt J. Mack's goal was to create a podcast-like series where he managed to raise $500,000 for charity, with donations going to organizations like Child's Play and Direct Relief, plus several others over the years. He posts his first video on March 7th, 2011. By the time he completed the challenge, that would be 14.5 years ago. Each episode wasn't really built around gameplay in the traditional sense. It was Kurt just walking in a straight line while talking through whatever was on his mind that week. Sometimes science he'd read about, sometimes just what was going on in his life at the time. That format is exactly why it worked as a long-term project, instead of burning out after a year like most gimmick challenges do, because the actual content of each episode had nothing to do with how far he'd walked that day. For the first 10 episodes, Kurt doesn't actually start his journey to the Farlands, although on episode 11 he officially starts his expedition, leaving the home he built for himself. Later in 2011, Mojang patches the Farlands in beta 1.8, only months after Kurt started. Luckily for Kurt, he didn't update his world and has stayed in the 1.7 version ever since to avoid destroying the bug that caused the Farlands to generate not existing. In 2012, he surpassed 700,000 blocks, officially making him a bit over 5% of the way there. A few years later, in 2014, he passes the six-figure charity goal, marking one of the most successful seasons in terms of money raised. 2015 was one of the most significant years, as he reached 2.2 million blocks, where the first jittering started occurring due to floating point errors. At the time, he said there was a computational rounding error that would only get worse the further he went. And he was right, because that same year, he was officially recognized by the Guinness World Record book for having the longest journey in Minecraft. By 2017, he had pushed past 3.1 million blocks, almost a quarter of the way there. And by the end of 2019, he crossed 3.8 million, putting him at about 30% of the total distance. The real second jitter didn't actually hit until the following year though, in 2020, when he crossed the 4.2 million block mark, and the game's floating point errors doubled in severity again, exactly as the math predicted they would. By 2021, he'd pushed past 4.8 million blocks, closing in on 40% of the way there. In 2023, he walked about 1.6 million blocks that year alone, marking a very significant year in terms of actual distance covered. In 2024, he passed 8.4 million blocks, the third major jitter milestone, and by the end of the year, he was 9.8 million blocks in, or 78% of the way there. Then in 2025, he started the Flobathon, a subathon event where he aimed to finish the journey and raise even more money for charity. The way the whole project stayed funded was through these season by season charity goals. Each new leg of the walk only kicked off once a fundraising target for that stretch had been hit. There's even an interactive map online that lets you scroll through the entire route, marking every sign and every base he built along the way, all the way from spawn out to the end. After 850 episodes and raising over $530,000 for a variety of organizations, on October 4th, 2025, over 14 and a half years after he started, he officially reached the Minecraft Farlands. The moment itself happened while he was sailing across open water, when the terrain up ahead just started to warp. He laughed and said,
"That's a very big ocean."
He placed down a sign that read, "Here Farlanders first set foot upon Farlands, October 4th, 2025, closing out a journey that had been running for over 14 years. This was an insane achievement and is widely considered one of the greatest single achievements in gaming history, cited as an example of how long-term commitment and dedication pays off in an era of instant gratification. The scale of walking 12.5 million blocks is incomprehensible, and considering it took him over 14 years, you can see why it was so highly regarded. What made it hit even harder for the people who'd followed along is that most of them had grown up alongside the series. Some viewers started watching as kids and were fully grown adults by the time the sun finally went down. Now that Kurt has officially reached the Farlands, he is still walking and exploring other glitches in his worlds. He renamed the Farlands or Bust series to Farlands and Beyond, where he turned north, traveling alongside the Farlands border to eventually reach the Corner Farlands, which would be an absolutely insane achievement. Kurt's journey is proof that dedication and commitment to something, no matter how long it takes, eventually pays off. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.